Welcome to the One Within All to the Innerverse podcast. From a stormy night in Southwest Missouri, I'm your host, Chance, and I'm just hoping that tonight it's not my tower that gets struck by lightning. Tarot jokes aside, you might have already inferred from the title of this episode that this time around we're going to be lighting up the dastardly archetypes that our world is suffering with in an attempt to restore our dear listeners to a more pure perspective on the heroic symbolism found in the traditional 22 major arcana cards of the tarot. That may be a mouthful, but the working thesis here should become clear as we dive in. And before going deeper, I want to let you know that this podcast is going to include visual components. We'll be examining what I call the Transhuman Tarot, an intriguing, if not disturbing, reimagining of the major arcana that is found hiding in the shadowy corners of a video game from late 2020 called CyberPunk 2077. I've touched on this game in recent shows, both mine and other podcasts too, but if video games aren't your thing or you don't want this one spoiled for you, have no fear. This chat has little to do with the plot or gameplay of Cyberpunk and everything to do with the synchromistic message that can be mined from this sneaky slice of esoterica that many of the game's players might barely have even noticed. So to make sure you have access to the same pictures we're going to describe, I'll be sharing slides in the video version of this episode and uploading those slides to link in the show notes for anyone who wants to follow along outside of YouTube. And I know how it is when audio shows throw slides out there. Sometimes I myself will forego pulling the images up. But trust me when I say it only takes a moment to access them. And despite our best efforts to verbally depict these pictures, there's nothing quite like seeing it for yourself. I also want to address anyone out there who might be about to turn this show off because they don't want to be programmed by negative symbolism. That's a fair concern, but in my personal experience, looking at the dark does not harm one who is filled with light. Light is awareness, and bringing the symbolic subtext of our world into our conscious mind's awareness is precisely what allows us to choose what we take in and what we reject. Symbolic literacy is psychic self-defense, and despite these images being blatantly dark or inverted, to me it's just as likely that the artists involved in their creation saw themselves as giving us a warning, as it is likely that they intended to subvert the masses with them. And since we will be looking at this Transhuman Tarot alongside the more archaic Rider-Waite edition and considering the occult correspondences to the different arcana, this episode might also serve as a useful lesson or recap of the major ideas of this original hero's journey template. As synchronicity would have it, I've been preparing this presentation for a few weeks now, and today's guest popped into my message inbox with the perfect timing and personal skill set to be the ideal candidate to break all this down with us. Her name is Lindsay Sharman, and in addition to being a seasoned taroscopic trooper and eclectic author with poetic, philosophical, and fictional works published to her name, she's also a fellow podcast producer with an awesome show called Rogue Ways that you can find on YouTube and podcast apps everywhere. And although we just met, I can see from her guest list and stated intentions on Rogue Ways that we certainly overlap in just about every category of consciousness expanding content, and that the still small voice within me is practically screaming that I'm about to make a new best friend. So please don't forget to check the show notes for links to Lindsay's many works. Give her a like or a follow and support her if you can. And as always, if you want to hear the double-length version of this show and not have to miss the latter half of the analysis, you can get all the extended episodes of Innerverse on Patreon for a very affordable $5 monthly donation. And despite my best efforts not to hog the mic for a long intro, it seems I've only scratched the surface of introducing this huge concept of corrupted archetypes. And with as much great work as Lindsay does, I probably didn't do her much justice in the intro either. But at some point, we've got to just do the damn thing. So, friends, if you're ready to share some magic, please extend your preferred etheric energy apparatus through that non-local astral dimension to the bubble space of our most excellent guest, Lindsay Sharman, and welcome her with a psychic hug, high five, or at least a little tickle in the aura. She's the rogue researcher resisting the transhuman reset, transcendental tarot card tutor, and analog authoress extraordinaire, and I'm super excited to get this party started. Lindsay, welcome to Innerverse, and thanks for joining us.
Wow, what a great intro. Thank you so much. I think you absolutely nailed it. I have a lot that I do, but I think you touched on most of it. So thank you for sharing that. It's very nice to hear.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm glad that I was able to at least somewhat encapsulate all the many things that you're up to. But before we get rolling, definitely take a moment to let people know where to find you, what your most awesome stuff is, or tell us about you a little bit. But let's also maximize our time here, because I'm sure you and I are probably going to have a lot of conversations and we'll have time to get to know each other.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm excited to have you on my show as well, which, as you mentioned, is Rogue Ways. And you can find it on YouTube under Rogue Ways. And the best place really to go is the site. I have a site, rogueways.org. And Rogue, of course, is Rogue. A lot of people misspell it Rouge and then they can never find it. So keep that in mind. And then it's ways and not waves. And it comes from rogue waves, right? It's a play on that word, but it's the idea that all of us are actually rogue warriors once we're on this path, and that the pathways to becoming a rogue warrior and the pathways you can go through after becoming a rogue warrior are so plentiful, right? But when we can all join together in sort of a single time and space at once, or a single intention, that's like a rogue wave of like glory. Like we all did it, right? So I love reaching out. I love connecting with people. I love the community that we create together. And so I also have rogue.locals.com, which is my place where people can come support the show and also hang out. And it's sort of like anti-censorship platform that you can support content creators but also interact with them. So it's like kind of like the Facebook idea. You can make posts and you can make comments, you can interact as a community, but you can also subscribe and like support your content creator. So I really love it because Facebook is a censorship happy, awful place, you know, and then this is a nice alternative. So you can do any of those things. Check it out on the podcast on YouTube. You can go to rogueways.org and get tarot readings and all sorts of different writings and books and stuff, or you can join the community at rogue.locals.com and just come chat and hang out.
That sounds like an alternative to social media I could get behind, and I didn't know about it. So I'll be making an account. Come find me there, everybody. This sounds really cool.
I love it. And, you know, some people were kind of critical of it at first because they're like, oh, you have to pay to comment. And I'm like, well, it's $2 a month. And if it's a show that you love, $2 a month is pretty fair. Like, I don't know about you, but I put out a good amount of content. And so if you love this community and you love this content, you have every reason to do $2 a month, to be a part of something like that. And it really is a special place because everyone who's there chose to be there. You know, and if they're interacting, they paid to interact. So what you're getting is like the best. You know, you can get a lot of trolls, you can get a lot of haters, you can get these people that just kind of sap energy and can be positive in many ways, but like can also be a problem in many ways. But you don't really get that there. We just get like the people who really want to be there and really want to connect with each other and create that community. So I love it personally.
Yeah, I think the lesson of communism shows us that if everything's free, then the quality goes way down for everybody. Yes. And yeah, we need to invest in the people that are investing in us, because I see this type of work as an investment in a community to try to create that type of a wave like you're talking about. And we do need to unify our collective vision about these things we call archetypes. And this is my attempt at a clever segue to talk about archetypes before we kick into gear on these images. I want to make sure and lay the groundwork by defining this word from your words, and then maybe like what the major arcana is to you, because that's what we're going to be examining. Yeah,
that's a really good question. So archetype, if we break it down etymologically, it has that arch, which is kind of this like idea of like ruler or like dominating, you know, and then types, which is almost like themes. So I look at the major arcana and the archetypes within them as like the dominating themes of every, like you said it really well, it's the original hero's journey. And the hero's journey exists, these archetypes exist because it's exactly how every story goes. You know, none of us is unique in a way. You know, in a way, we're absolutely unique and nothing will ever be exactly like us right here, right now. And another way, we're all exactly the same as everyone else. And so we can see this in each other's lives. We can see it in our own lives. If we break it down, we can see the phases that we've gone through. And sometimes we revisit certain phases and sort of like a mini cycle, you know, but overall, like the path of our lives, it follows this hero's journey and it follows these archetypes, these ruling themes that are laid out in the major arcana of the tarot. And so it's a really clever set of devices to allow us to work with those energies and have that reflected back at us, to have this in something like the tarot that you can use to sort of get in touch with your deeper self and your higher self and you know, see which of those sort of archetypes you're playing out at the moment, or which are sort of trying to get your attention, or which are sort of beckoning you to like keep coming forward, and just all sorts of orientations and patterns that you have in your life. But it really is, it's like the fundamental foundational journey, and it's cyclical, you know, that all of us go through.
I do think the major arcana represent that perfectly once you are able to get with the program of what the symbolism is trying to tell you. That's why I bring up symbolic literacy, because we really do. For me, that was like the greatest gift I received from college as an English major. I had no idea that was going to be the thing that defined my life going out of there. I thought I was just picking an easy major to get through the 4 years, but thankfully synchronicity helped me out right there too. And analyzing these things can be very helpful. And the other thing about the word archetype is the arch could also refer to the starry dome above the zodiac. And when it comes to the major arcana, that's another thing to point out, that you can't separate it from the zodiac. Well, you could if you don't have knowledge of the zodiac, but you're going to deepen your understanding, because not only does this hero's journey play out in our lives and in the stories that we tell, which are actually the same thing, it's also nature has this same type of progression. And we see that we can see that link through the zodiac and what they call the sky clock, how that it describes the seasons as much as it describes humanity. And since we're all this big fractal soup, it makes perfect sense that they would all align. And last term to define before we jump in is transhumanism, because that's what I consider this alternate tarot that we're going to be looking at to be warning us about. I don't see how it could be anything but a warning, personally.
Yeah. Well, it's like what you said. You can take it as a warning, or you can take it as some like dark programming, but your orientation to it is what determines that, right? And that's true of all of the tarot as well, right? You can get any sort of card in your reading in any sort of place, and like specific to you in that moment right there. How are you oriented towards it, or how is it affecting you personally through your personal lenses? And that's how it's going to be affecting you. So like, you can use anything as a tool, or as and you can use it for good, or you can use it for evil, or you can use it anyway in between those things. And so it just is what it is, right? But you and I are taking it as a warning. I'm not going to let it program me or like insert any dark energy into my life. And like you said, our light is high enough and our awareness is good enough and strong enough that we're going to use that in a way that is positive and constructive for us, and nothing else. So I really liked that point that you made.
Well, and before we define transhumanism a little more, I'll also say that we really don't come to truth without dealing with inversion or with lies. That's the other. If we were just sitting in truth, in purity, with no such thing as lies, then we'd have no hero's journey to go on. So
right,
it's about
and you're
learning
cutting
who we
off
are.
half of yourself, right? Like if you're not in touch with the sort of darkness within you, or that you've experienced, or that your potential for it, you're only seeing half the picture, and it's nice because you get to imagine that darkness and evil are like not a part of you ever and never going to be. And then, but it's not true. And so you're stuck in a like stagnant place of fantasy and illusion instead of being really genuine and honestly you, which I don't think, a lot of masters sort of say, like, you can't really move forward until you're very, very honest about where you're at. And if you can't do that, you're not going anywhere. But yeah, transhumanism, for me, I mean, it says it again, if we break the word down, trans is like beyond, right? Humanism, beyond being human. And it's concerning because there's something like, there's a concept in our spiritual realm where we're like, it is like, or at least for a lot of people, I think, where they look at it as the point is to get beyond human, right? You want to ascend, or you want to like transcend, and you want to like become Buddha state or Buddha nature, like bring out your Buddha nature. You want to like become an ascended master or whatever. And I think a lot of people at least think of this as something that isn't human or is beyond humanism. And I think that core is like a rotten seed that's been planted, this idea that there's something better than and beyond being a human. And I really liked in some Gnostic lectures that I was really into for a while, where they highlighted that actually it's exactly the opposite. And it's exactly like we were just saying, where you like sort of accept that you have this sort of dark side or dark potential, and that it is part of being human. You accept exactly where you are at. You accept humanity. You love being human, and you are human, and you work with that, and you work with all these symbols and these archetypes and these energies. And in fact, you don't go beyond human. You become an actual human eventually. Like right now, it's almost like you're like a seed of a human. You're like becoming human sort of, and eventually you will be human. And I like that concept a lot more. And I think it's exactly the opposite of transhumanism.
That makes perfect sense. And to segue into this concept of, I'm going to bring up the introductory slide here. Oh, wrong picture. There's my notes.
Now we got to view it to the,
yeah. Yeah. So the corruption of archetypes, this is what I consider transhumanism to be, because on the material level, transhumanism is like replacing aspects of human behavior or even the human body with some sort of technological, which means artificial, so-called improvement. And this isn't to say like if you need a prosthetic because of an injury that makes you like an evil transhumanist. By no means. It's perfect what you said, that really what we're here to do is to blossom into our wholeness, which is what humans are. They are the seed that contains the information of the whole. And we could embody that, and we could even integrate what is dark as something that becomes our fuel for reaching to the light, just like the soil is made up of decomposed matter that was biological, right? So when we talk about corrupting archetypes, it's talking about corrupting parts of the body, because the 12 zodiac signs, the major arcana, they have correspondences to everything in nature, to organs, to body parts, to ways of thinking and feeling. It's a big soup of correspondences where we have a certain spectrum that it shows up fractally in a bunch of different sense modalities, right? So replacing or modifying even just the way that humans behave, especially in connection to nature, is itself transhuman. The point that we stopped living in an integrated and balanced way with nature and looking at it as a resource and a separateness, that was like the first step on this long road to transhumanism. And as you can see in some of these preview images, there's not a lot of nature in there, is there? This is the real evil genius scheme of transhumanism, is to completely separate human from nature. And it's even in the stated mission goals of a lot of the leaders in this so-called thought movement, to mirror or map our neurons or our brain patterns into some sort of simulated reality where we could be eternally alive there. And that entire concept, and then they try to convince you that you're already in one. This is a simulation theory thing. And to me, that's like taking the Gnostic, the purity of Gnostic ideas and converting that into a corruption, because the way Gnostic thought is interpreted by people that haven't read much Gnostic literature is that nature is bad, the body's a prison, we have to get out, Yaldabaoth has got us. But yeah, I mean, we're in the creation, we're in the totality, we're part of the whole, the perfection. And it's not that we can't evolve or change, but it's like, it's our responsibility to be very aware of how we're evolving and changing, and to take responsibility for our version of the archetypes in our mind. And so as we look at these one at a time, I think it's going to give us some clues about the directions not to go if we don't want to end up in like a technocratic hell world, or I don't think that we could actually become brains inside of a machine. I don't think that is even a possible thing. They have a complete misunderstanding of what the mind is, but still, like the fact that they can get people on board with that as a concept says a lot about what people will be willing to accept that can happen. So anyway, I'm sure you have thoughts on all that, and you go for it while I move us over to slide 1, and we can look at it while you're sharing.
Yeah, it's like the central key, like you said, is a disconnection from nature. And this was like the start, and it's just getting stronger and stronger as we embrace and rely more and more on technology. And it's hard, we're sitting here on technology having this amazing badass talk because it exists and because we can use it, so I'm not going to pretend like I don't enjoy it and use it. But I also notice more and more that we walk away from our inherent abilities. We lose them the more we rely on technology, and that is part of what makes us human. And we can imagine it being ever more powerful and strong the more we get reconnected. And we can imagine, we hear of all these things that seem like magic to us, and I just think they're actually commonplace when you are in your flow, in your natural state, connected with everything that's around you, rejecting nothing, and not separate from the earth and all of creation. And so I really want to emphasize that we have superpowers. We just are letting go of them more and more and embracing of this complete inversion of nature. And like you said, it's been like sold to us as this thing that's even better and better than humans, beyond. And only a fool would go traipsing into that blindly without looking at the cliff in front of them.
Yeah, so I don't think I'm going to read the, there's a little passage here. I'll read this first one. But what I did in each slide, there's a version with Rider Waite and a version with just the Cyber Tarot, if you will. And the one that shows just a Cyber Tarot, I also took a screenshot of the text that is in the in-game menu associated with it. And I think some of those might be revealing, some might not. But in a sense, these are like highly simplified and even dumbed down in a way. And I think that speaks to the corruption of archetypes in itself, because in reality, this fool means so much more than 3 sentences.
This. Yeah.
Yeah. But let's go ahead and look at the writer version next to the Cyber Tarot. I also forgot to say, one of the main characters in CyberPunk is named Rogue, which is
really
kind of interesting. Yeah.
That's awesome. Are they good? I hope they're good.
She's kind of
they're
like
chaotic neutral.
She's more of a lawful neutral.
Okay.
Maybe like a chaotic neutral. It's hard to say.
Just on the verge.
Yeah, like maybe a little chaotic. Maybe chaotic neutral. Anyway, cool character. Game's got a great narrative. If you're into that sort of thing, I am. But
yeah, no, you made me want to play it.
Well,
this made me want to play it already. So
give it a few months and they'll have all the bugs ironed out, because they rushed it out to get it out in 2020. And I think it has a lot to, there's so much 22 in the gematria of the game. I've said this before, but they're really excited about 22 in that game, like below the surface, if you're looking for it, and even like posted on graffiti and on big buildings. And I think that could have something to do with the fact that the narrative is actually really based on the major arcana. I mean, there's literally a tower struck with lightning, terrorist attack type part of the plot, and all kinds of stuff that is exactly this alchemical process, but in a narrative form. So it's pretty wild, but if you don't know what you're looking for, you wouldn't see it. And there's 22 cards in the major arcana. They really are excited about 22. I see a link there, but why don't you tell us what you think about this cyber fool?
Well, it's interesting. The cliff that he's walking off of is just a shitty building. I mean, the entire background is just nasty horror. And he's even emblazoned himself with all of this kind of techno dystopia, transhumanist garb. And he does have all the traditional elements, but look how they are inverted, right? Even the direction of his arms is exactly the opposite line, like the diagonal of it is going in reverse.
Feet too. He's got a different foot forward than the other fool. The original fool's got a foot backwards, and he's got one going forwards. Yeah. Didn't even pick up on that. And the original
fool has that the stance is like this carefree, which is what it's meant to represent, right? Like just not paying attention to details necessarily, not getting bogged down in that, just like traipsing joyfully forward. And this other fool in that inversion, it almost looks like this like tireless march, this like, it's almost like a Heil Hitler salute and this like tireless march feeling. The dog is completely inverted. The dog is always, in most versions at least of the tarot, very exuberant and joyful right along with the fool, right? You've got your partner here and your little mirror to go with you. This other dog is like dying. I mean, he looks dead. He looks like he's missing a leg, maybe. At the very least, he looks very sad and like he hasn't eaten enough.
Yeah, it's sad what happened to that dog. And of course, dog is God backwards too.
Oh, yeah.
About the fool's posture, I'm seeing this right now is that the original fool is in a posture of receiving and openness, and the cyber fool looks like he's reaching out to try to take something.
Yeah, good call. I like that. Yeah, and the stick is like a crutch in the inverted, game version, and in the original, the stick is a helpful tool to carry along. The very light burden. It's not even a burden at all. It's all you have left in the world. It just feels very light and airy, and the other one feels very dark and heavy, like a burden instead of that upliftment and release of burden.
And there's no sun. I guess implied artificial lighting in the Cyber Tarot. He's in the bowels of a nasty megacity. He's also got no flower. And I think that we'll see that theme throughout, that whatever nature symbolism was in the original card is just missing. And they don't even come up with correspondences for those symbols. Usually it's just like we've cut nature out.
Yeah. And check out the, where the sun would be is this it's the darkest area of the screen, actually. It's like a black sun almost.
Yeah, wait till we get to the actual card of the sun. Yeah, so, other than just breaking down the differences, like, one of those old kids games, what's different between these two pictures? What is useful to think about in terms of archetypes is maybe some of the mythic correspondence of the card. And so I've put all kinds of correspondences in here, which I need to point out. I took these from a specific book, which is Path of the Fool by Michael Tessarion. Michael's a great tarot teacher and has helped me massively come to grips with the multitude of correspondences with each of these cards. But I want to point out that Horus and Balder are both considered, and Adonis. These are characters that are meant to be like the most beautiful, the shining one. I mean, the whole world wept when Balder perished, right? Adonis is still a word in modern parlance that represents somebody's like ideal, beautiful beau.
Yeah.
And it's an ugly Adonis here.
Well, and just all that feeling of the Fool and the purpose, I think, or the of the archetype is to remind you of this feeling in this time where you are just carefree and you don't have a lot of burdens yet. And you have like almost this infinite hope. It's very childish and very foolish in a lot of ways. And at the same time, there's nothing wrong with it. It's where we all are. Sometimes it's a beautiful place to be. Sometimes the best magic can happen because we don't have so many, constrictions on our mind and our expectations of what might happen. And, there is this cliff in front of him, and you can focus on that and take that as like, oh, watch out, you're going to fall off the cliff if you're not paying attention. And you can also take it as like the reminder that when you are traipsing gaily forward in life with this ultimate faith like a child, sometimes when you step off a cliff, you find out that you can fly or float gently to the bottom, and so you don't actually have a lot of negativity in this. And then it's reversed, we can take out some more of those like warnings and negative aspects or whatever. But in general, it is that feeling of sort of youthful, exuberant, unknowing, not jaded yet, all those things that are so good. And in this inversion, again, it just feels like burdened, marching, empty, like you're going to fall off that building and you're going to die. And your poor little starving dog is going to eat you.
So I think we might spend more time on the Fool than other cards. Obviously, it's one of the most important ones. But I think the last thing I want to bring up about it is the planetary ruler being Uranus. That's also the ruler of the Aquarian age, which some people think we're now in, or that we've been in for a while, or we just crossed the threshold. As blurry as all that is, it's important to realize that Uranus, as the archetype of like the free spirit, the Fool itself, does, just like every other archetype, has an inversion. And the right hand picture here, the Cyber Fool, is literally everything about the inversion of Uranus, or the dark aspects of the age of Aquarius, which is total like technological lockdown, if you will, like separation from nature. So one of the reasons I want to bring up the positive and the negative versions of the archetype side by side is so that we can look at how we create our lives in the coming years as like, am I going towards the dark Uranian or or am I going towards the light?
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's a really good thing to pull out in that hope is that we avoid the negative Aquarian, the negative Uranian, manifestations of this energy. It's coming either way. What are we going to do with it? Hopefully not that.
Oh man, we got a serious character on our hands here with the Magician, the next card. I'm going to go ahead and read the Cyber version because I think this is a good one to read. In the cyberpunk world, the Magician is the card of self-confidence and adapting to situations through intellect and sheer will. The Magician is a schemer who always has one last trick up his sleeve, who despite everything manages to stay afloat and remain in control of his own destiny. And I think that that's like a very different take on the magician than the traditional version of the magician. First of all, intellect and sheer will, scheming and tricks up their sleeve, staying in control. That's like the magician, in my opinion, who totally cut off their feminine side.
Yeah. Well, and it does have like a masculine energy, you know, and there is something about it that's creative and willful and maybe, but like not, it doesn't have to be a negative way. Again, this is a concept that I think maybe people struggle with, that you can have will and you can assert will in a very powerful way that's very positive for you and creates positive transformation in your life or the lives of others, right? And so having that, it is like a masculine, directive, confident, maybe like energy. And so I can see where they tried to like find these connections and make it work. But like, again, yeah, with the darkest version of this that you can create, he's just got like knives laid out in front of him and he's going to cut people up, presumably, I'm guessing. All these faces behind him. I mean, what did he collect? Masks of people? I don't know. I like see him as this like murderer almost.
He's definitely a murderer.
Dark.
Look at that guy. He's taken his own face off and he replaces it with different prosthetic faces. Couldn't be more creepy. And the original magician would have the 4 suited tools, the wand, the sword, the cup or chalice, and the disc or pentacle. And the pentacle, of course, has the Venusian 5-pointed star. On the cyber magician's desk, he's got only weapons of killing, knives, nothing magical about that. And it looks like maybe a candle or some sort of a vessel that's got an upside down pentagram on it. But the mask thing to me is what stands out the most, because what I have come to understand about like artificiality itself, the mask, the persona, that's the lowercase s self will, that when that's out of alignment with the will of creation, you get suffering, death, corruption of your own nature. That's what you get. So I see what they're describing as him being like a willful guy, as saying that it's his will or the highway, right? Like, whereas the original magician is aligning his will with creation itself. That's why he's got all these symbols that represent the elements of creation. The cyber magician's thrown all that out the window and he's just juggling different faces.
Right. In fact, the original magician, part of that, having all 4 of the pieces in front of him there. And I really love the deck I used. They're in like perfect balance with each other, like all present. It's very beautiful. And it's kind of representing how these are our four bodies, that we have as well. And when we ourselves can, pull those 4 bodies that we have into an alignment like that, where they're all in one, again, kind of like what you described, we're aligning our will with the will of nature. We're using our own internal alignment to create external alignment, which is magic. And this guy is not only not aligning any of his, bodies or aspects of self. He, in fact, seems to have discarded aspects of self by cutting off his face and who knows what else. And so he's, doing again another inversion of that central concept. And then look at that infinity sign, right? It's on the crown of the magician, which is where it belongs. I would say it's like the eternal beyond self, right? Our heightened highest self, maybe. And this guy's got it down in his core, where we have our sort of again personal, internal, selfish, maybe like a version of will that isn't in alignment. So they kind of nail it. Like, I'm kind of proud of them in a way for how well.
That's why I'm like, this might be a warning. They clearly know what they're talking about, Yeah. You couldn't just make a cyber tarot like this exact without knowing the original tarot and what it represented pretty well.
Right. They'd have to have someone like Caesarion on to to working with them to like make it this good.
That studio's previous game series that they were famous for was The Witcher, also steeped in Western esoteric thought. Really liked that game series too. That the other thing is, like, we're pointing out that they seem to try to invert everything they can in the cyber version. It's, maybe minuscule point, but the hair of the original magician is low, straight and dark, and it's falling to his shoulders. And this new one, the hair is like spiked up to a point and gray. Also, looks like it's possible that he may have breasts. It might be a female.
Yeah, I think it's a transgender, or maybe we were just dumb to assume it was a male.
It could,
but that masculine energy,
it could be this androgen thing that is like the external unification of the pillars instead of the internal, which is
isn't that so silly?
Transhumanism is all about transgenderism.
See, and I used to think that they just got it wrong. Like they misunderstood and they're externalizing it. And that's why they're like obsessed with androgyny and stuff. And now I'm like, oh no, that's just so they could screw all of us over and like lead us astray. They understand perfectly. They're just not worried about themselves. They want to control us.
Well, nature is life, right? And life continues itself. And I have homosexual friends. I have transgender friends and listeners. This is not against them.
No,
it's your lifestyle choice to do this, but you are making a pledge to never reproduce if you decide that that's your life path. And again, not everyone has to reproduce. This is not a personal judgment of anybody, but when the media pushes this idea constantly and intentionally to young children who are making their decision and very impressionable, to me, it looks like you're trying to keep people from reproducing as much. And it seems very contrived. And he's also, instead of having the as above, so below symbolism, like the original pointing up and pointing down, this one, his arms are held into his core, almost like he's contained.
It's all right here. Yeah.
He's keeping all of his energy inside. He's not like, linked up to the above and below energy in sort of a pranic sense. He's demonic in a way. He's self-contained. He's an artificial intelligence, almost like not connected to the higher intelligence and therefore able to not even consider the will of creation in his actions. This one's wild, man.
Yeah. That is very turned inward. It's a really good call. I kept looking at his arms. I'm like, why are his arms like this? So that's exactly, I think you nailed it. It's like a selfish, closed off internal loop, not connected with anything, like you said. Yeah, they nailed it in a horrible way.
To get into the mythic correspondences, the most basic one is Mercury or Hermes. And just a real quick touch on that, people may already kind of know this correspondence, but he could be the messenger of the gods, or he could be the thief in the night. And it's the dark and the light versions of it. And Thoth is a similar deal, but with Thoth, you have this extra aspect of supposedly creating language and writing. And the concept of the persona and the fake sort of the false ego self, not the real true personality ego, that false ego persona, which is also in law, the straw man and like the legal name and all this stuff, it's all contrived out of words and by getting people to identify with nouns. So on the dark level of Thoth, the fact that this guy's got all these masks, which are personas. So there's 2 cards in a row with masks, by the way. The Fool was wearing a mask. That's very 2020.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just see that sort of language aspect of Thoth as being connected to the persona idea, because you're taking on a different name. You're a different demon in a way as you put on these different faces.
It's interesting too, the magician, is connecting again, like as above and so below, and these different energies and drawing them into the here and now to create something. And, we get that sort of similar story in creation of language in various different mythologies too, right? Like we drew it into this realm in a way. And it's interesting to wonder if that was like some sort of a trap or some sort of a gift. And really in the end, I feel like it's like anything. It's a tool. You can use it for good or for bad. It's here now either way. So here we are. But it's really good to, just like you described, understand the ways in which language is actually used to trap your mind and your soul into little tiny packets, which we're not. We're not digital, right? We're analog. We like to flow, keep continuing and growing and transforming. And words don't really do that.
Yeah, they don't. They don't have life. They do in some sense, but that's a bigger conversation. And
yeah, we can do a whole show on that.
Words have life because they're vibration in the verb sense, but words as a abstract, as a noun, they don't. But anyway, there's so much more we could probably go into. Maybe the last thing I'll say about the persona thing is that in what we see now today is that people have social media profiles where the face that they put on there is literally through a filter and photoshopped, and it's their best day. You're meeting people on their best day when you go meet someone online and go look at their profile picture. Like it's not accurate. It's not living. It's a snapshot. It's a mask. And we all are doing it because that's the way that the technology works. But we all want to put our best face forward. But in our interpersonal relationships, I think we suffer a lot when we have to try to keep up a different persona with different people for different purposes. And it's like self-murder 101.
Yeah. This is the third time today that this concept has come up for me. Once in a reading earlier, once when I was talking to a friend earlier, and that idea that interacting with people when you can't be, or you feel like you can't be true to yourself, and when you're actively suppressing yourself or actively crafting a different self in order to present that to people is so exhausting and it's so draining. And when you think about it, it makes sense because you're literally taking a part of yourself and you're changing it into something else, and then you're giving it away. And you're like, there, that's yours now. It's not me, it's not mine. So you're like draining yourself. You're literally giving your energy away when you do that. And it's really hard for a lot of people, but truly when you can wear no mask, I mean, you replenish yourself by wearing no mask. So you find people you can be yourselves with, like we can do here on this show. It's like fills you up. You feel good. You get more energy.
Speaking of masks, I really want to put a mask on this high priestess. Terrifying.
Seriously.
Terrifying.
Oh my God.
And they make the description in the cyber version about mystery and secrets and the cold, still waters. This is a very one-sided interpretation of an archetype that contains so much more. And as we'll see when we look at it in comparison with the high priestess of the Rider Way. But let's get your opening thoughts about this extremely monstrous feminine character.
Yeah. I mean, she's not only very monstrous and disgusting. I really there's something about the way she's laid out and exposed that makes me feel like she's almost like being prostituted or like she's about to be raped, perhaps. I mean, there's something like strangely objectifying and like vulnerable at the same time, which it's just like, it's a really bad vibe. It's completely opposite to what you would, and it's the inverted feminine, I guess, when you look at it that way, which is pretty disgusting. And yeah, like how gross. She's all wrapped up and it's all like rags that are bloody and empty and ripped. It looks like she's been harmed, and like look how her arms are like out like this. It looks like she's been crucified. I mean, it's definitely disgusting. It's disgusting inversion of that energy. The original is such a massive, like infinite void of like ultimate potential, which is what like the feminine like represents, is this ability to create out of this infinite potential and this like drawing in of all of these energies. And it's very disturbing. It's weird. I didn't expect to be so affected by the images, but that's because I'm so, I think, close to the original intent that it's just disturbing. It's
again
weird.
It's like they knew what they're doing. This is speaking to me too, and I don't like this image at all. But just like the ones before, everything posturally about her is opposite. The plants that were behind her, I think it's pomegranates in the original.
Yeah,
and they're not there for the cyber one, but the Boaz and Joachim pillars are actually still there. But she's standing instead of seated. There's no crescent moon. There's no cross on her chest. There's no book of law, which is the Torah, and which is an anagram for tarot, by the way. So she's basically gotten rid of everything pure about the original symbolism in this one. And also she's got one red eye and like nasty monster teeth. So I think that's an interesting one too. It's like the dark... It's like the external, once again, it's the external unification of duality that is meant to happen internally.
Yeah, that one eye thing too, it goes along with a lot of the, symbolism that is used to program or to show like allegiance to a certain agenda. So that's interesting too. And, it almost looks, and maybe I'm reaching here. I don't know, but there's a pretty like solid line towards her lower abdomen, and then one kind of like strand of the ripped gown that goes down. It's like you could almost see as an inverted cross type shape, but I might be stretching a bit. But I just am looking for ways that they might be inverting, and maybe that's there.
I mean, if you see it, there's some intuitive level that you're seeing it, and everything else is inverted. So it's at least implied. In fact, to go back from externalizing something that should be internal, you already pointed out that her posture is like a crucifixion. And so instead of the cross being on her chest representing her core within herself, she's doing it externally. She's spreading herself externally in a scary way. Also, she's got no feet. Neither version of the high priestess, you can see their feet, but on the writer, it's implied that they're grounded and on the ground, but maybe mysterious, like that part of her is in mystery. Like Isis is the goddess of mystery, like you don't lift her veil. But this is an Isis where mystery has been raped completely.
Yeah.
Completely removed from the ground of reality. Her feet aren't even there. So of course she's not grounded with the earth.
And it's interesting. So the crown, you know, whatever you might take from that, there's an aspect of purity or purification. There's an aspect of almost, you know, like enlightenment or whatnot. And over on the inverted side, it's like, it's still very like lily-like. It's a very similar shape. And it has some of those feelings, but you watch it and it like wraps down around and it strangles her neck and her throat. And, you know, when we talk about the ability to take these energies into this infinite feminine, you know, this void space and have all this potential in order to then presumably create afterwards, this choking off of a throat would actually take that away, right? You have to speak something into existence often. You can't talk if your throat chakra is strangled and cut off. And I don't know if they meant to go there, but again, that's what
they did. They did, because the high priestess is wearing blue in the original, which is the throat. And there's no blue in this new one. Zero blue.
Really
it's just
good point.
The black and gold. Yeah, they knew what they were doing. They were not messing around with this.
Yikes.
To go back to the idea of a corrupted interpretation of Gnosticism, this is the Sophia that created Yaldabaoth, as opposed to the wise goddess feminine aspect of the, you know, creator itself.
Nice.
Yeah. So, okay, this is a good one to move on from, because I'm tired of looking at it, honestly.
Yeah. Make it go away.
We're getting a reprieve here. This is the one that has some semblance of beauty left in it of all the cards in this. This one really, the first time I looked at it and thought about it deeply, I actually had an emotional reaction to this. Because, I mean, what's more emotional than thinking about your relationship to your mother? And my mother is a Taurus, which is ruled by Venus. And the Empress, card number 3, is Venus's main card, really. One of the most important Venusian cards. So before I give my thoughts on why the differences here are what they are, I want to get your take. I do actually like this one relative to all of the others, although it makes me very sad.
I had a very similar reaction. I was like, oh, that one's actually beautiful and has some sort of elegance and like lightness to it. And then I looked a little bit closer. I'm like, there are dead bodies. The flowers or naturey sort of seeming things they're flowers of some kind. I guess they're growing. But in a way, especially the way they're interspersed with the dead body, they almost look like they're like, I don't even know what I want to say, like a slime mold or something, or like some kind of fungus or something that's coming out of the dead body. So there's still something like dark even to this little bit of nature. It's definitely not the wheat of the Empress, which is, you know, like life-giving and whatnot. So that's also dark. And also the idea that the Empress has this aspect of return. You know, my initial thought when I first looked at this inverted version of the Empress was, this woman is bawling. She's like crying because she just came back and slaughtered her like abusers or something, you know, like she looks like she is triumphant, but that it cost her a lot in order to be triumphant, and that she probably gave up a bit. And so, and we see some little watery elements there. So it is a very emotional card. But it's that idea of return inverted, because instead of returning back to, I don't know, something that's like nurturing or goes back to your passion or your roots almost, you know, it's returning to this darkness, returning to this place of suffering in which you had to like fight your way through to survive. It's a dark version of return, which is one of the themes of this card, at least. So those are the things that sort of like stood out to me instantly, at least.
Yeah, that's how I see it too. Almost like maybe her abusers were actually her children. That's something that I kind of feel here, almost like it's a late term abortion, to use an tactless phrase. I see it like that this is the goddess of love. This is the archetype of love. And so even calling it an inversion, it's almost like you can't even quite invert her. You can't even quite invert love. No matter what, she still got love. Like, she wouldn't have those tears if she didn't have love. And there's not a lot of love in the rest of this transhuman situation. It's like Venus is the last holdout. And in like a Western esoteric sense, Venus was the first one to fall. Venus was Lucifer, the light bearer, the archetype that got transformed into something totally different than what it originally was in a planetary sense. And I think that it speaks really highly of the power of love and care as the thing that drives everything in the reality to occur. It's what everything is birthed from. Like, what you don't care about doesn't happen. So it is really sad to see. What I think is maybe being depicted is that love, at a certain point, love will kill you. If you don't get with nature, then nature will have enough love for itself and for everything else to just like go ahead and get rid of you, because you're not. That's like the wrath of God. It's evident in the consequences of our behaviors that go against our own health, our own nature, our own body, our own environment. We automatically get punished for that through the direct material ramifications of that behavior. And I see this as almost like the extreme result of that. Like, she had to come in and get rid of some of these monsters.
Yeah, that's a really good take. And going back to that idea that this is a warning, it's like, okay, if you're going to go this path and you're going to get this dark, like it's not like you're going to totally lose yourself. You're still going to exist in this, and that central core of love is not going to be destroyed. But you might have to do some pretty dark things with it. Like, you might have to use that empowerment of love, which this card is also a lot about, that to do these kind of like reprehensible things that you wish you never had to do.
Almost like it's just for survival at this point, because nature wants to protect itself. Venus and nature go hand in hand. Venus isn't all of nature, but the concept of Venus, because of that phi ratio association and how life builds itself out of that structure, I think that is kind of the message here, is that like nature will survive. The core of what we are, this like love and survival, will continue. And that even life will continue. Like, there is still some form of life under her feet, but your corpse is going to be feeding it if you're one of these zombie cyborgs going on.
Yeah, it's a really sad take on some of the transformative like abundance that's otherwise exists.
Yeah. And all these mythic correspondences, though, all of these goddesses got in the fray and fought at different points in their hero's journey in their stories, from Athena to Freya to even Aphrodite in the fall of Troy. She was right in there. So I think that this is like, what's happening is that part of the archetype is the only one that can really even exist in this inverted corruption of nature. But yeah, this is probably my favorite one in the whole thing, honestly.
Yeah, it is the coolest one so far, for sure. And like you said, like, you get the most emotional sort of response and enjoy it a lot more than the others. And I do love that aspect of, the Empress card is this idea that there's been a sort of long and possibly very difficult journey that this woman went on to get to where she is. And she's basically a badass. And, like, she understands all of the sacrifices that she might have to make, or the battles that she might have to fight in order to be in this position of accomplishment, I guess, and leadership. It's a pretty cool thing to notice. And it is nice that some of those elements still exist in like a pretty straightforward way even in the inverted card.
Yeah, you just can't kill love no matter what.
I like that.
It's the primary grounds of existence. So no matter how far corrupt we get, that's going to be a component. Care will still exist.
I just wish we didn't have to like go that far to figure that out and realize that it's unstoppable and just go with it instead of fighting against it all the time.
You and me both. But
we'll see. We'll see what humans choose.
Well, here's the reason why maybe she had to go bust some heads. We got a really incredible version of the emperor here. The game makes it out to represent sort of like the patriarchy, and doesn't, I mean, it does say that the emperor makes the rules and enforces them for the common good, but is mostly emphasizing the dominating and ruthless version of the emperor, if you will. And the, positive elements of the emperor, a benevolent ruler, that's like completely lost on the concept of this cyber emperor. And yeah, there's a lot here, kind of amazing depiction, really, because it explains a lot of, the, what you call the technocracy is perfectly illustrated.
That's really a good point. It is absolutely technocracy in a card. We send this to Zuckerberg and whoever these like people are and see what they think about it. Like, do you see yourself yet? Here you are. But yeah, all those wires coming out of him. He's clearly corrupted himself by choice, and possibly because each of those wires is some aspect of control. And it really is all of the, again, I know we keep using this word, but the inverted qualities of the emperor, where you have this sort of overbearing and darkness and authoritarian, like autocratic, like clenching down on this control for like self gratification and for control's sake. And, and it's awful. He's even elevated really high up on his little throne there, his dark black goo throne. And, even the original emperor, and I think in most times I've seen the emperor is often here he's seated in his throne. His throne's not elevated up super high. It's not even that fancy of a throne. It has some symbolic meaning, but it's not like this totally ornate kind of over the top throne. And in my deck, the emperor is actually standing on the ground barefoot in front of a huge tree. And so emphasizing that idea that like you do need strong leadership, and these masculine qualities are very positive. We want them. We want to have people who have some of those. And especially when you can have them in people who are not going to elevate their throne so high up you could never reach it, and cover themselves in all of the, dismembering mechanisms of control and power that have gone on here. And it's funny too, even his gaze over in the corrupted version, he's like looking over his shoulder. It's almost like you were never even supposed to be able to see him. He's like, what are you doing here? How could you see me? Like there's this idea that you've sort of snuck in and you're not even supposed to get that point of view. You're supposed to be down on the ground, like looking up at this towering thing and never being able to really see it.
You're supposed to be plugged into your pink goo matrix pod.
True.
And that's got a wire going straight from it to him. Yeah, there's a lot here. He's looking over his left shoulder. That implies, of course, like the imbalance towards the masculine in a way. Like
good point.
The imbalanced version of the emperor. We've got nothing relating to nature left here at all. The color yellow is an interesting choice because it's like an octave lower than the orange related to the normal, the orange and red.
Oh, good point.
Or not an octave lower, but a different emphasis, I should say. It's emphasizing the will element and not as much of the roots, which would be the tree and red, and the sacral, which is the creative force, which would be in the orange. None of that is evident, and those are like very important, especially the creative force, because nothing in our realm do we see like springtime, the explosion of energy into the dimension. It's just oozing out of every other corner that everything's coming to life. Like this is energy. And instead of the energy of spring represented as like, nature blooming, now all these cords and pipes are going into him. He's taking the energy into himself instead of being part of the whole where it's all happening in the world, if you will. That's kind of what I'm seeing. And, Jupiter is associated with this. Jupiter is the expansion force or space itself. And what we see here is that he's the god of some sort of cyberspace where space isn't even really conceptually limited in any sense. And he controls all the space. He can create as much space as he wants. It's like the run completely out of control version of Jupiter in that way. And he's got no crown, which I think is interesting. It's yet another kind of like the magician version where anything enlightened about the higher chakras or, higher perception or third eye is just like shut off or not there.
constricted or like channeled into something completely inverted and foreign. And, it's like all his crown energy went into creating all of those like wires and connections or something, or is being siphoned off by it or restricted from blooming by it, or who knows.
You could see him as a prisoner to it too. That's a really interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, and you feel bad. It's interesting in that way. It gets to some truth where, like, any of us who has an imbalance in our masculine or feminine energies are sort of a prisoner to that, because we haven't yet. If you haven't mastered that and brought them into balance, then you're just subject to their sort of whims and excesses and whatnot. So in that sense, they have some truth in there. All of these have little bits of truth in them.
Anyone that wants to play master is going to also play slave. You can't exist one way or the other. He's a slave to the tech, maybe a slave to some AI that is at this point overrode his entire brain. I don't know.
And then that's why I always look at my concept of God that is so different from other people's, or a lot of people's, I should say. I'm sure a lot of people agree with me at the same time that, God is not controlling, and he is not a master, and he is not even a ruler. He's like, go do whatever you want. I'll be here. Like infinite, acceptance and freedom and like that.
Yeah. How could you hurt somebody or take away from something that's already got everything? And that's us. That's what we need to realize. What can you take away from us? We have the seed of it all.
And if you know that, you don't ever need to wear a mask or be scared about a virus. So you're free.
Yeah, he's got a mask on too, or his face is completely shrouded in darkness, one or the other, but it's the same effect.
I bet that's part of why we liked that previous card as well. She had no mask. She just had her real face and some real emotion on it. And it was like refreshing already.
Yeah. Okay, so Lindsay, we're at the hour point, and I think I can go ahead and project that we'll, at our best, we'll probably get through the first half of the Arcana. Maybe we could do this. Pick up the second half on Rogue Ways, and we can both have. Cool. We can both have both parts on our channel, mirror it over,
Yeah, I like that.
That'd be like a simulcast and a swapcast in one. It's perfect.
True. That's the best.
Okay, so before we swap over to hour two, let people know where they can find you again. So also they'll know where to look for a continuation of this awesome conversation down the road.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes, I would love to see people on Rogue Ways on YouTube. And I do live streams on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays at 7 p.m. Mountain. I have guests of all types and calibers and, walks of life, and just from the big to the little to the east to the west and all over the place. And it's fun. And then I also do lots of episodes where it's just sort of me waxing about various current events, or, sometimes I do a deep dive into a certain subject, and there's just all kinds of stuff to get into over at Rogue Ways. And it's also on every podcast app, so you can listen to it as well. Again, I'd love to see anybody at rogue.locals.com join the conversation, share some content, like get into whatever. We do a lot of conspiracy and just alternative thinking and questioning of everything, but we're really strong on the community level. Like, we really genuinely like and support each other in a very real way. So that's really cool and refreshing as well. And then I'd love to also invite people to rogueways.org, which is my site where you can find books that I write and tarot readings, and I make orgone pendants, and I do blessings, and I do classes, and I do all kinds of stuff. So go over to rogueways.org and check it out.
I knew you were my new best friend. This is great.
I know. We're just met yesterday, and we're like, rad, let's do everything.
We got a shout out to the shadow producer of Inversion, which is Matt Landman. He puts me in touch with awesome people from all over the world all the time. And he's also super caring, to go back to talking about that archetype again. He's someone I've never met in person who shows more care towards me than a lot of people I've been friends with for years. And I appreciate the heck out of that guy. Man, love that guy. So when you told me that he said to get in touch, I was like, perfect. If Matt sent you,
we're good.
You're basically Neo. Let's do this.
Yeah. Yeah, Matt is as genuine as they come. It's hard to find people who are that real, and it's pretty awesome, and who give that much of themselves, out of pure love. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, real life superhero. All right, well, we'll hop over to hour two. Guys, check the show notes to get in touch with Rogue and see all her ways. I called you Rogue. Just because of that character, I'm mixing up archetypes.
That's where it came from. I used to be called the Rogue Warrior, so.
Cool.
You can call me Rogue if you want to.
I'm super excited to get into hour 2 because this flew by. It was so much fun to look at this otherwise really horrible stuff.
True.
Weird how that works. But all right, thanks everybody.